Hey, Jeff, welcome to All Things Crime.
Hey, Jared, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Appreciate you coming on today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, Jeff Cheek is like the best criminal investigator in the history of criminal investigators.
Wrong.
No, he's a good man. Jeff was a police officer for quite a few years and got into, I know, at least narcotics detective. And so I'm gonna let Jeff introduce himself. So take it away, Jeff. Tell us about your background.
Well, my father was in law enforcement, so I was naturally kind of drawn to it, kind of a family thing. And I actually started right after high school. And I don't know if there's probably a lot of places that don't have what's called a cadet program, but I started right after high school as a police cadet. It was a way to get experience before you actually turned 21 to be sworn in. And I really liked the concept because they would immerse you in about everything there is that they could immerse you in. I mean, back when I started in the late 80s, they would go have you, doing vice and narcotic stuff, using you to go see if you could buy liquor, um, having you tag along with the detectives in narcotics stings and things like that. Uh, put us through, at least me, I went through the training unit. So I actually helped academy classes and saw what the training unit looked like, the hiring and recruiting process. Went to the crime. Ours was called identification. Now it'd be called a crime scene unit.
Mhm.
And so got the didn't. Fortunately, it was good experience. Unfortunately, at a young age, you're seeing a lot of death. We had 80, 90 murders a year, homicides a year. So there was ample chance to get your feet wet and go to autopsies, go to crime scenes, see how crime scenes are handled. How to take pictures, what angles. We were sketching back then. Just how to sketch it out. I mean, developing photos back in the back room. The old stinky stuff back in the back room where you got to dip all that. Back in the dark. And of course, the older guys mess as much as they can. Went to dispatch, saw one calls were about, got assigned to the evidence room. So I got to see how evidence was collected. I actually saw the cold case rooms and how they tend to set. Was big into training, got used as the dummy mostly because you're the one getting beat up. You're just a cadet. They remind you you're about as low as it gets. So you're the one fetching coffee for the secretaries back then. So it was a wide range of experience, but I can tell you, hitting your feet running in a department that was pretty high volume like ours, like just in the police academy alone, right before I turned 21, they put you in the police academy knowing you're going to turn 21 and get sworn in. We had 5 of our guys shot just while I was in the academy alone. So you know that all these experiences are going to lend a hand when you're going out into a high volume, high crime place. It was real. We were answering 30 calls a night, which is way higher than the national average should have been.
Wow.
But you immerse yourself in that. And so I spent several years at that department. I tried another department on for size, brought my experience to a smaller department. Thought it would be more like the Andy Griffith kind of show potentially, but being able to actually have more autonomy instead of running call to call to call to call to call. Get in and investigate some stuff. I was able to start their narcotics unit, kind of a first narcotics unit. It was widely successful. A lot of the other bigger departments started seeing we were the real deal when we're out buying, drugs in their neighborhood, 25 pounds of dope somewhere in their neighborhood. They start to take notice that you're doing, something good. And I moved up to the rank of major slash assistant chief. So then I got to do everything from, be part of contract negotiations, oversee the training, really mentoring the younger officers. And so I became the media relations officer. So I went to media schools. And so I got a pretty comprehensive background, although one thing that I'm missing, I love working on cold cases, is I never really spent time as a homicide. And so I really, I've got a lot of friends that did it, and your interviewing's the same. I mean, you're putting the cases together. You still have to. I mean, in narcotics, we put together search warrants and arrest warrants. Virtually a lot of that stuff is the same, but it's not that when I work these, I can come in and say, "Hey, I'm a 20-year homicide detective."
You
I got
know,
into corporate. Go ahead.
not everybody can be occupy every position. So
Right. No, and I got into corporate security after that, and honestly, a lot of law enforcement does that. After I left the second position that I was in, and corporate security, on top of paying better in the world, it's again, it's you're bringing your investigative skills. I've weeded out millions of dollars in fraud. It's just a different type. You're working by yourself mostly. You still have to have a rapport with law enforcement. The unique thing about being a PI now, though, is you were military, Jared. It's our profession. I love it. I love police work. I really do. It has its moments. Of course, it's tough on law enforcement right now. I wouldn't want to be back, but it's not always well received. Like, you were a Marine, right?
no, I was in the Army actually.
Okay, you're in the Army, and I've got friends that were in the Marines. I'm sorry, I probably mistaken your branch of service, but wherever you get out, my friends get out and they do their 4 years or 6 years, and they get out, and it's like, once a Marine, always a Marine, or once you're in there, you're a veteran and you get all the benefits that come with that. Police don't really embrace each other on the outside like that. It's odd, but you can spend over a decade in law enforcement like I did, and it's not always just here's the welcome mat, come on in.
Hmm.
You're just this former cop. We're not. I'm still a cop. You're not, and you get a lot of that, and I hope that changes someday, because there's a lot of guys that I know that took a different, guys and girls, that took a different route and want to help out with cold cases and things that really have got a lot to bring to the table. I'm hoping that there'll be a little bit more acceptance, as years come.
Yeah, there's a really unique atmosphere in the law enforcement community. And I think part of that is fostered because when you're in the middle of an investigation, number one, a lot of the victim's information has to be secured and can't really be shared. The suspects that you're looking at, you don't ever want that to get out, because you don't want the suspect to actually know that they're being investigated. And so I think a lot of people in law enforcement, they learn over time that you just absolutely keep all your cards right to your chest. And it's not that law enforcement, in my opinion, ever really wants to be secretive and not share information with the public. It's just they can't until it actually reaches a point where the investigative part of it is done and they actually issue charges. That's when a lot of this information comes out. But as long as there's an ongoing investigation, everybody that's in the department that might know about it has to keep that really quiet, because otherwise you can screw up the entire investigation. And so to me, it's just kind of that mindset that law enforcement kind of gets into. And part of that becomes, once you're not part of that intimate crowd anymore, then it's almost like a need to know basis. You're not part of the inner circle anymore. And so you don't have a need to know the information that we have. And therefore it doesn't matter if you were a cop for 10, 15 years, you're now on the outside. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, but it's, for me, I had 14 years in the military. And so I kind of have a little bit of a relationship with at least the background of a lot of police officers, but at the same time, I'm now in industry. And so in some ways, they kind of look at me almost as the enemy. They're like, well, all you want to do is sell us something. And, that's not necessarily the case. It's like, if the law enforcement agencies that actually use the expertise that I've developed, which is pretty specific because I'm all focused around DNA collection and the M-Vac, but there's still that little bit of expertise that the agencies that use that and use it the way they should solve more cases. And I look at you in the same way. I'm like, here you are, you have unique experiences that you could bring to the table. And in lots of cases, I think that expertise would be hugely beneficial. But the agencies that know how to use that will take advantage of it. And the ones that don't, some of them are going to struggle. But it's just, you're right. It's really just an interesting mindset and atmosphere in the law enforcement community, because in many ways it's kind of almost like a paramilitary organization, but in other ways, it's a total community service organization. And then it also has to be an investigative organization. And between all of those, it's just I think being a cop, and I'm not speaking from experience, I'm just talking from guys like you that have, over the years, I've gotten to know pretty well. It's just an amazing, I don't know, cops are just special people, man. There's very few people that I think can actually do it. Once you get involved in it, once you actually understand, like you said, going through the academy and being a cadet and learning all that stuff, it's baptism by fire, man.
Oh, it is. I mean, as soon as you get out of the academy, a lot of the older guys will say, now, forget that crap that you heard in the academy. I'm going to show you how to stay alive, and I'm going to show you how to do real police work. And so, yeah, no doubt the immersion part has to take place. And I was fortunate enough to be in a place that was really, high volume, and you could really get your feet wet. I don't understand the guys that tried to stay away from the high risk parts of town, because that's where you get your immersion. That's where you get your training. That's where you hone your skills. So I was always, give me what you can give me to give me the best experience and be able to use my talent and skills. And you do create these cliques, kind of. I mean, law enforcement's a tight community, but a lot of that is because you either have politicians on you, or you have the people that you're trying to protect against you that don't really understand. They tell you that you'll have a jury of your peers if you ever get picked up. You don't have a jury of your peers because they don't see what you see every day. They don't make decisions. They're not fighting for their life. I mean, when you're fighting over your gun, or you're crowded, or people are crowded around you, and community dumps on you. I mean, it's a special breed of person that'll stick with that and do it. And God bless the homicide detectives who spend a lot of time doing it and still have passion, because you do kind of feel like, and I do know this for sure, that it's you against the world. So your trust bubble lies within that group. So you'll see cops generally associate only with cops. And they used to warn us against that. They said, be diverse and have friends that are outside that bubble. Don't get yourself, so sucked in there. Well, now as a former police, when I try to go work on cold cases, I run up against the same thing. And I get it that your trust bubble is here, and you're really not supposed to share information, but specifically about cold cases, you got to be a little more open-minded. Like, I'm working on a law right now that would make it, here, you have the cold cases. We're talking about Freedom of Information Act stuff now. If you've got information on the cold cases and you've got nowhere, and it's sitting back in some corner room somewhere, whatever that time frame is, 16 months, then you should bring somebody in like the rest of the world does, sign a non-disclosure agreement, vet me as a private detective, see if I'm in good standing, and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to share the case for the sake of the family, because we can't work on it. We don't have the funds. We don't have the manpower. We're being attacked by defunding the police, which they're trying to do now. And I don't think the people that understand that know that there's over 200,000 cold cases unresolved in the United States, and about 5,000 or 6,000 a year. It keeps going up every year that are unsolved. So this isn't a time to defund the police. This is a time to pour more training and more funds into the police. So what it'll do is it'll mean there's people like me that are frustrated, saying, hey, I'm working for free for the family. I'm not charging anybody anything. I do other jobs to make money. But if I'm going to help, I need access to the case. I need just a little bit of cooperation, and I need a little bit of trust. So vet me, do a background, recognize me as a licensed private investigator and former officer. You don't forget, much like you in the military, did you forget all your military training when you left? I mean, did you forget how to use an M16 or whatever you had? I don't think you did.
There's stuff like that that's ingrained forever. It's like,
right, which is why they do that. That's why they make you disassemble it 1,000 times. You'll never ever forget. We did the same thing. When you go on 30 calls a night and you do things repetitively, and you're on crime scenes repetitively, and you see how evidence is handled, and you see how to interview people, or like when I started in narcotics unit, it was just like just roll one after the other. You understand all of these things. When you go to get search warrants, you understand what a judge is going to sign off on and what they're not. You're clear about probable cause. I can assure you of that. So you know what probable cause is. So all of that doesn't just leave your mind when you leave police work. And so I
Right.
remind them, if you're saying that you're scared about messing up the case, don't be, because I've worked on cases. If you're afraid that I'm going to share information, make me sign a non-disclosure agreement where you can sue the hell out of me if you need to. But if the family, and then more importantly, if the family's wanting me to give them their own representation, then I need to get past the hurdles to help, which means the DA's office too. It doesn't. I'm not trying to pick on police. Like I said, they're overwhelmed. They're told you're going to work on these cases. We don't have time to do this. So it's not their fault individually. It's more of giving them the resources and saying, the last I heard, there's about 7% of police departments that have a cold case. I mean, 7%.
Wow. Wow.
And so if that number is true, and I think that was from the Department of Justice, they're trying to encourage law enforcement to, how do we raise that number up? How can we do that? So they've given grants and things like that, but how do you get the funding for testing? I mean, it's hard for them to get the funding for testing.
Right.
So someone from the outside says, hey, can we do fundraisers? Is there anything wrong with doing fundraisers? We won't touch the money. It'll go into a kitty, but there's forensic testing that needs to be done. That's all. The whole reason I met you in the first place was because I started down the path of learning about DNA, which is something we were never taught about. I mean, we were taught in general terms, but when I saw that this case needed to be reopened, a case that I looked at long after I was gone from police work, had always haunted me. I said, surely there's some modern technology. Surely there's something that they can use now that we didn't have back in '89 or in '95 or whenever. And there was. I mean, there's your system, and there's other systems that try. It's hard to try to introduce that
Right.
and get your foot in the door if at first somebody's like, who wants to talk to me? A private investigator about a cold case? Tell them no, shoot, get away. And so it's a hard proposition to get the DAs and the commanders of a police department, and then down finally to the homicide detectives to say, hey, I did research it. There's some really good stuff going on outside your area. I really think it could help the case, and not be perceived as though you're trying to be a know-it-all, or you're an ex-cop trying to be a cop again. That's all. You're just wanting to try to be a cop again. Well, no, if I wanted that, I'd go apply. I'd go apply for a police department. That's not my intent. I actually, the interesting thing, Jared, about PIs is that sometimes it's easier for us to go get the interviews, right? That, we don't have the color of law thing to deal with as far as I want to speak to an attorney now. Don't talk to me. And you're part of the government called the police department. And if I don't want to talk to you, I just say I need an attorney, and then that's it. Nothing's admissible. And we don't have to deal with that. I just go try to talk to people and get a rapport. If there's something good, then I can pass it to the police department and say, hey, I think there's something good with an interview with a person that you guys didn't talk to, or the old detectives didn't talk to. The resources to have a cold case unit. They'd love to have the money in the DA's office too to say, well, heck yeah, let's do a bunch of M-Vac filters. Let's really do a bunch of stuff here to cutting edge stuff. I like a lot of the work that Francine's done, but when you search, it's out there. There's a lot of good things that we were never taught about, touch DNA and things like that. And so I'm hoping that your product and even some of the methods that Francine's developed too, I really hope that can get on, and people will be open-minded to say, let's check it out. One of the other things is about state labs. The old paradigms are, we have to use state labs, and we have to use police. No PIs, no private labs, no private assistants. I mean, eventually we're gonna have to balance that out and see, vet the private lab like you vet the private detective. If they're going to view the case, view it in a room under microscope, have a camera on them, sign a non-disclosure just to see if they can help the family in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's a way we can come to a compromise and push some of these 200,000+ cases along.
Well, it's interesting you bring that number up, because that's just homicides.
Yeah.
And what most people don't understand is there's over 200,000. I think the last number I heard was like there's over 230,000 cold case homicides. And
Right.
if you start adding assaults and rapes, and that's just the big three, you're up well over 1 million. And so that's just cold cases. And then, like you said, there's additional cases that they're adding to that every year because they just can't get to them. Some of them, they run out of leads, and some of them, the technology hasn't caught up yet, which is a big reason why the M-Vac is being used as much as it is, because some of these cold cases are working their way through the process, and the detectives or investigators, the crime scene investigators, we talked to a lot of them too, and they learn about the M-Vac and they're like, holy cow, you can get DNA off a rock, or
Yeah.
you can get DNA off of clothing that is 30 years old. And I
Right.
think the new record, I'm not sure if I've told you this, but there was a case up in New York where they got DNA off of some clothing items that are 56 years old.
Yeah, I read that. I love that. That is
Yeah.
awesome.
Isn't that amazing? So,
It is. And
but
here's the thing,
yeah, go ahead.
from being in two different areas, mainly as a cadet, I mean, they put you in there for 8, 10 months and you just get immersed in it. But the crime scene stuff, there are really some police departments that really did good crime scene stuff, and they really have preserved some evidence good. I mean, granted, there's going to be some that probably didn't preserve it right because they didn't know at the time. But I know that the department that I worked at, they were really good about kind of, you collect evidence today for stuff that could potentially come up tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, you preserve it for what you've got today, but you always have to think about tomorrow. So we were putting in paper bags. We weren't putting in plastic bags. We were preserving it. They're not going to get moldy. It's not going to. There is a lot of that that's out there right now. That the good news is it was preserved. The hard thing is, or if there's the bad news, it's how do you crack that code to get some of that opened up, to get everybody open-minded enough to say, could you test this with M-Vac, or
Right.
can you give this a try? And that to me is the hardest thing right now
Mm-hmm.
to pry into.
Well, there's cold case societies out there like ASOC and other societies, basically, people that specialize, and a lot of them are just donating their time and resources and efforts in order to solve these cold cases. But one of the things that they're pushing for is to get legislation passed that if a case hasn't been solved after a certain amount of time, and obviously it has to be reasonable, but there's cold cases out there that have been lingering on for 25, 30 years. They still haven't been solved. The exact same detective that was the original investigator is still the primary detective that's assigned to that case. And it's like, are you kidding me? Why if a case has been sitting for 5 years, I understand that agencies are limited on their resources, and I don't know what percent of a department's budget is actually focused on the now, making sure that their officers have tactical gear and patrol cars and whatever else they need to actually serve the community right now. But those cold cases don't go away. Those cases that are unsolved, whether they're active or they've actually been shelved until new technology can come along, at some junction, the families that are tied to the back end of that, whatever victim is there, that victim has a family. That family is always going to want justice. And how do you eventually solve those? If the department itself doesn't have the time and resources to do it, like you said, how do you crack that open, and how do you eventually find justice for that family? And I think if we could get that legislation passed, then to say, look, after 5 years, if the department hasn't been able to solve it, it's not necessarily the department's fault. But after 5 years, then it's up to the family. If the family wants to raise some money, or the family wants to assign a PI to it, or whatever, then that should be they should be able to determine how the case is processed from there. And if they want to raise money and get stuff sent to a private lab, why not? If it's been sitting there forever, then
Right. Well, there's a play on terms. There's a couple around here, and there's a play on terms. Homicide's never. There's no such thing as an inactive or homicide case because they're always active. Okay. Well, we all know that in law enforcement. but you can't tell me that you're playing around sometimes with the semantics of how you're presenting that. You're not doing anything on it, right? If you're not doing anything on it, it's collecting dust somewhere, and somebody's willing to work on it and potentially re-examine or put some new eyes on it, whether it's a new detective that has the time or whether it's outside resources. Don't play on it. Well, it's an active investigation. You can't, so I'm going to block it because and I don't think that they do it intentionally, but I think what happens is the system is so much like you said, you can't, not for your eyes. You're not a cop. You can't see this. And you're not a DA. You can't see this. To what end are you going to tell a family member that's now, I've got a father in a cold case that I'm hoping I'm getting some progress on, that's 84 years old. All he wants to see is he wants to see justice for his daughter getting murdered in front of her two children back in 95. Before he dies, he wants to see justice. And he'll tell you that. And,
Right.
and that's reasonable. It's what any police or DA person would do if they lost a loved one themselves. So to just come out and say, well, it's a cold case, it's active, I can't talk to you about it, it's secretive. Well, you want that secret to go to the grave? That's one point. The second thing is, remember now, if you got 230, 250,000 homicides unsolved, that means 250,000 killers potentially are going to do it again, because we know that homicides have a high rate of somebody perpetrating it more than once,
Hmm.
right? It happens. And some of them could be connected, because there's not a lot of interstate cooperation sharing between agencies too. So if this person's good for three across different places, you all have let it get cold. Now you've got a serial killer that's out running around thinking, I got by with all this. I'm going to do it again. And so I'm working on one where I think the person's good for three homicides, very likely two, but potentially three. And so, where's the meetings brokered even together to say, let's all pitch in and work on this? But you can't just look at it like justice for a family. That's number one. You have to look at it as though the more that you let this person outrun around, the more potential it is risk to the public. We worry about COVID, and things like that. This is a risk to the public. These are killers that have gotten by with it, that are running around, that if you say or do the wrong thing, cheat them out of a promotion, whatever it is, you could be on their list. They're sitting there writing down how they're going to plot your death, another unsolved death, and you've made them wiser, if nothing else, on how to get by with it. The other thing is, like I've told them, there's a couple of things that I've told homicide detectives that I've talked to too, is, they're like, you don't understand, we're busy. Well, I know high crime areas, they're busy. There are a lot of places that are busy, but I say you don't own busy. I mean, I've been in the corporate world and the police world. Police don't own busy. There's guys in the corporate world that are working 90 hours a week, that are being pressed, that are having heart attacks at young ages. Everybody's busy. It doesn't mean that's an excuse to not look at it, or kind of get bent out of shape if somebody wants. The way I look at it is, well, she's waited her turn in line. you know I look at it like, well, this happened in 89, and you're telling me that you don't have the resources to look at it, but you've got all these other homicides, and I get that. But the big picture is, somebody up above who dishes out the resources needs to understand that these cold case, these victims and these victims' families have waited in line, their turn in line, for decades to get these resources. And some of them went cold. You know this, Jared, because we didn't have the resources in the 80s that we have now. And so it's not a matter of, there was absolutely no witnesses, nothing we could have done. We had nothing to gather. No, a lot of times, and you could start by picking off the easy ones. Go back and look at the ones that maybe you gathered stuff, and maybe it was gathered the right way, and maybe it was kept dark, and it was kept in a room, and it was cool, and it wasn't subject to the DNA getting denigrated. Start with those. But they've waited their turn in line, and so the more you push it off, witnesses die. I've had that happen in cases where I've asked to have a witness to verify an interview that I had, and the witness died in between the communication between me saying, I've got this witness that wants to talk, that saw something on the press release, it saw something on a presser, the Facebook. A
Hmm.
lot of families set up justice for their loved ones. And then I interviewed them, and they had something seemingly good to say. I gave it to you, and then they died. I mean, so what do you do with stuff like that too? So I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's their fault. I'm just saying that somebody at the higher levels are going to have to say, we have to tend to these. It's not got to be the individual homicide or the
Yeah.
individual ADA. It's going to have to be the head DA working with the heads of the government, the mayor, the police chief, everybody to say, we need to do something. We need to do our part to lower these 200 plus thousand cold cases, because you rack up
Well,
another 5,000 to 6,000 a year in the meantime. So it's only going to grow.
yeah. What's the threshold? Is it
Right.
is it 300,000 homicide cold cases that at that junction we change the way we do things? I don't know. But at some junction it becomes unsustainable, and we're going to have to face the fact that police agencies, especially in the current environment, like you said, police agencies at some junction are going to have to say, you know what, we do not have the resources to address how big this problem is getting. And not only and just throwing money at it's not the answer either. And I know a lot of politicians that's like, well, we'll just fund it with more money. That's not the answer. The answer is you pull in resources like yourself. There is expertise out there, and if you just look at some of these cold case societies, the amount of expertise that cold case societies have is unbelievable. I mean, these guys can pull together DNA experts and crime scene experts and interrogation experts and psychological experts, and they bring them all into the same room, and then they'll crack open the files of the case, and they can evaluate it in ways that in a relatively short amount of time. And a lot of this can actually be done electronically, because a lot of these files are electronic. They can share stuff. It's all secure. And then they can come up with leads, and then they can present it back to the department and say, hey, here's what we found. Go put this guy under surveillance and, get a DNA sample, that kind of thing. And then let's drive on from there. And I can't tell you, I'm sure you've seen it as well, but I could name probably a dozen cases just off the top of my head where that's exactly how it was solved. And at some junction, I think that's going to have to happen on a mass scale, because, the police agencies right now, their job is to keep their communities safe. And yes, investigation is a huge part of that. But at the same time, solving some of these cold cases and getting those off of the cold case docket, at some junction that has to happen. And you can't just wait it out. So,
and sometimes that is the solution to keep your community safe, because again, those are killers that are running around that are subject to potentially doing it again.
mm-hmm.
We were so busy when I was a young cop that we were told, put your blinders on and just drive to the calls and answer the calls. Don't do any self-initiated duty. But where I'm coming from was, I said, well, okay, but if I drive by this drug corner and I see people out here that are slinging dope left and right, they probably got guns on them. We're probably going to there's a shooting before the night's up. The older people are going to complain there's bullets whizzing through. At what point are we shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak, while we're going by the future calls that are getting ready to happen right here by not addressing these drug corners and all the drugs and the guns? And it's the same way with cold cases. To what extent is this over here that you don't have the time or the money or whatever for going to turn around and be pushing up, more cases? It is.
Right.
It's going to be a big circle.
Right.
And one thing I'd tell you about these groups too, it's funny. I offered to some of these cold case society groups. They're great. Love the concept. So, I donated money and gave some, said, hey, I'm here as well if you ever need anything. I think they even need to be more open-minded, to be honest with you, because some of them, if I didn't have a 20-year homicide detective resume, then it's like, hey, thanks. And they pat you on the head and go, that's cute, that's adorable, but we got this because we are homicide detectives. And then I look at some of the people that's on there and I'm thinking, well, I've known one or two and they were not exactly the go-getters that you're thinking that you got. So don't let a resume trick you. And even when I've hired people in my business and in PI business, or hired people in corporate security, I just want to see somebody's going to produce results. I don't need all the flowery, I've been, at this fraternity, or I went to this, whatever. Sometimes you have to kind of just look at the person and what they've got to offer and what they are producing, the results they are producing, versus making it, again, a click, much like you can accidentally do, or you can inadvertently do with the police department. Don't make that a click. if there are forensic people out there that can't tell you that they've been on the scene for 25 years doing forensic crime scene stuff, but they're a whiz and they've only got 5 years experience, well, listen to them. You know, I mean, and it's
Yeah.
the same way with people in my field. I think that I do pretty decent work, but to pat somebody on the head, I'm 50 years old. To pat somebody on the head and say, thanks, but you don't have that resume. You didn't come from a big city doing, 20 years worth of homicide work. So we appreciate it, but we'll handle the big stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Everybody needs to be a little open-minded, and we all just need to drop our egos and solve this problem. It's no different than solving the human trafficking problem. Let's just collectively put our resources together and find the people that can produce and develop winning teams and collaborate and start hitting some home runs, man. I love your product. I love some of the things that have spun out of your product and some of the people that have used it and developed other methods. I love that the information's getting out. We need to put all of our best resources together, just like no different than if we're trying to win a major league game of some type. I mean, you got to bring all your resources to bear. Get your heavy hitters.
Yeah. No, the A game has to show up. Well, listen, Jeff, I've kept you for a little longer than what I thought, but you know what? Conversation has been so interesting. It's amazing how fast time flies. So I'll tell you what, the beautiful thing about All Things Crime is we can have you on a bunch of times. So, if there's other cases and things that you have to talk about, let's have you on again.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you're doing, Jared, from the bottom of my heart, man. Everything that you're doing, keep pressing. I'm going to do what I do best, and I'm going to keep learning from people like you on the forensic world that we from the forensic piece of it. And
okay, well, hey, thanks, Jeff.
all right,
we will talk at you later, and I'm going to if you have a website or anything that you want to share, then just let me know, and we can put it on. Tag it onto the video. So, but yeah, you keep up the good work as well. There's an amazing amount of good stuff that, like, guys like you that are cop turned civilian, military turned civilian. There's expertise that lots of people are bringing to bear, and we all have the same goal. And like you said, let's if we all just got synergistic and just we're pushing all in the same direction, then who knows what we could actually accomplish.
Absolutely. Force multipliers. I get it. Yep. Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it, bud.
All right. Hey, you have a great Thanksgiving. We'll talk to you later.
All right. You too.